I ran across an article a week or two ago, and it caught my interest. And there was a particular line in that article. It was written. There was a particular line in that caught my attention. And that line, and I'll give you a little more information about it as we go. The line was this: our default setting is life. That is, we are geared to attend to the aspects of earthly existence. When confronted with things, when you have this initial reaction to things, our default setting is life. Got to take care of life. Got to take care of the house. Got to take care of the car. Got to take care of me. Got to take care of my health. Got to take care of the bills. Our default setting is life. It's that stuff that's all around us, and it's happening all the time, and it needs attention. We got to get it done. And he mentioned in the article there's nothing wrong with taking care of all of those things, but sometimes they can get us off track. I thought about another verse of Scripture in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 29. There the Apostle Paul is talking about Christ and the church primarily, but he's using the image of marriage to do it. And he mentions to the husband that he ought to love his wife as he does himself, and that no one ever hated his own flesh but nourishes and cherishes it. Our default setting is life. We're not going to do things to injure ourselves or to not be aware of the things around us that call for attention. That's our natural inclination. And it takes effort, it takes determination sometimes to lift our eyes above the temporal things around us, to think about things of the Spirit, to think about eternal things. If we only see with our physical eyes, if that's the only way we look at things, it's not going to take long for life to get headed in the wrong direction. 2 Timothy chapter 4, Demas forsook Paul, having loved this present world. Matthew chapter 26, Peter denies Jesus because he goes into self-preservation mode. He can see where this thing's heading with our Lord, and he sees that if he gets grouped with Jesus at that particular point, that's what's going to happen to him. And so he denies the Lord. The default setting is life. And it got the better of him in that case. In Luke chapter 12, there's a parable about the rich fool who dies unprepared to meet God in eternity. His default setting was life, and that's the only thing he saw with the physical eyes, temporal things around him. And he enjoyed his bigger barns and the bountiful harvest and living it up. And he let that default setting of life capture all of him. And it caused him some trouble. Morals bend to circumstances. Godliness can yield to personal gain. Relationships with mankind can take priority over fellowship with God. Wealth and possessions can become an end in themselves if we allow that default setting of life to lead us through this world. Then we're not going to be ready, and we're not going to be headed the right way. We're going to have some problems with it. The idea of our default setting and being geared toward temporal life reminded me of an Old Testament passage. And you find a reference to it on the screen behind me. And that's in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11. He's made everything appropriate in its time. And then this statement: He has also set eternity in the heart. Doesn't that make you wonder about that? What does that mean? God set eternity in our hearts. And if you think about that, and if you understand what's going on in Ecclesiastes 3, that becomes a governor. It puts in check this default setting of life. It keeps things in the right order because it has this eternal view in mind in everything. And it gets things in the right order where they ought to be, and it doesn't let that default setting take over. Sure, we need to take care of things day by day as things go along. We've got to have meals to eat, and we've got to have shelter, and we've got to have warm clothing in the wintertime and all that sort of thing. And so we take care of that, but we do it appropriately. And that's what's going on in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. So I'd like to bring those two thoughts together, this default setting of life and having eternity in our hearts, and see how they work together in this passage. We're going to begin by setting up the chapter a little bit in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. The book of Ecclesiastes is presenting Solomon as very often frustrated with life. He looks around him, and the wise king is seeing how things are going, and a lot of things to him seem pointless in the book of Ecclesiastes. There's this cycle of life and death that's going on all of the time. And it seems to cancel out everything that man can achieve. You seek worldly wisdom. You go to the schools of higher education. You gather your degrees. You learn this, you learn that, you pay attention. You look after pleasure. You collect possessions. You want power, and you attain a certain level in the standing among men. And you accumulate your wealth, but all of that seems pointless to him because there's this cycle of life and then death. And death takes it all away from man. So what's the point of doing all of that? Well, he's moving us toward a conclusion in the book of Ecclesiastes. He's moving us a direction. And when you get to the last chapter, chapter 12 and verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them. And Ecclesiastes 12 then begins to talk about the aging process. And we combed through that one time in a lesson. We combed through Ecclesiastes 12. And it talks about, your teeth falling out, and your hearing going, and your eyesight going bad, and your bones ache. And, we went through all of that, and I noticed some folks came up after that lesson that said, that is so depressing. And I won't say they were older, but they were. And so they were living through some of that, and now I am too. And it is kind of depressing to think about. And that's where Solomon's at in the book. He's thinking about this cycle of life and death and how all this stuff comes over us. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've attained to. And this process of dying and the failing body takes it all away from you. And it's just misery. And so he tells us in the beginning of Ecclesiastes 12, before he starts describing all of that stuff, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before those evil days come. And you say, I don't have any pleasure in them. There's no delight in those days. But if you remember your Creator in the days of your youth and you build your life that way, if you build your life ready for where it's all going to, with eternity in your heart, then you take those days in stride. And you see an appropriateness even in those things. You get down to the end of that last chapter in verses 13 and 14, the conclusion, and he's moving us this direction all the way through the book. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it's good or evil. We're coming to the judgment seat of our Lord. We're coming to that final day. We're moving that direction, so lift your eyes up. Don't let the default setting of life take you away from that. He has set eternity in our hearts with a purpose. And it helps us in life, in everything that we face. Our chapter, we're looking at chapter 3. Our chapter is going to fall in line with that conclusion of the book. Here's the way Ecclesiastes chapter 2 ends. And it really becomes the setup for discussing chapter 3. Chapter 2, verse 26, for to a person who is good in his sight, He is given wisdom and knowledge and joy. Now, what's wrong with that? Nothing. to the person who's good in His sight. Their life is aligned with God. They're thinking that direction. He's given them in life wisdom and knowledge and joy. Here's the flip side. While to the sinner, He's given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after wind. So you have these two different individuals, these two different categories. The one who's good in the sight of God, and he gets what life is about. He lives it the way it's supposed to be lived. He gets out of it what God wants to give. But then there's the sinner. And he's scurrying around life, and he's doing this stuff that Solomon describes as vanity, vexation of spirit. It leaves you so empty, and that sinner is living without this view of God and eternity and coming into the judgment scene, and he's just scurrying around life, gathering up all that he can, and the Lord tells us he's gathering it to give to the one who's good in the sight of God. And so you have those two different scenarios. Now you enter chapter 3, and chapter 3 is going to make sense when you understand how chapter 2 ends, leading into that with these two different categories of people. Now you come to chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. There's an appointed time for everything. And there's a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what's been planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. A time to search and a time to give up as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. And so you have a sampling of all these things, all these different categories. You have a sampling of that going on. All these events that go on in our temporal world, we face these as we go through life. There's 28 different actions here, and a lot of those are set up as opposites. You have this, and then you have the opposite of it. Or you have the beginning here and the end there. They're set up sort of counter to each other that way. And there's a time for everything. There's appropriateness to all of that. And the way that I've usually studied this text is to try to figure out, when's the time to throw a stone? When would that be? And a time to gather up stones. When would that be? How would that fit? What's that talking about? And to go through each of these lines that way. But I don't think that's the point. I don't think that's what he's trying to get across. This is inspired poetic literature. And it's giving us sentences that move from this to that, beginning to end, and rather than specifying, okay, this is what this line means, and this line, that's when it's appropriate, rather than doing that, just grab the idea. Just get the concept that God's made everything, and there's an appropriate time for everything, and guess who's going to understand that? Remember the end of chapter 2? You have the one who's good in his sight, and God's going to give him wisdom, knowledge, and joy. The one who's good in the sight of God is going to understand how to move through life and figure out this is appropriate at this time, and this is appropriate at that time. This is the right way to turn here, and this is the right way to turn there. The one who's good in his sight is going to get that. And they're going to have this idea of eternity in view. They know what they're moving toward. They're going back to the Creator, and they're geared for that. And so as they move through life with all these temporal things that happen, they understand the turns of life. God's guiding the way. But then there's this sinner. And they're determined to struggle against God in life. And they get very frustrated. And the end of life, they come up empty. And they're making all the wrong turns. They're not understanding about life and how it's supposed to go. I think that's the big idea that's there. It fits with the end of chapter 2. This creation is under the control of God. We're moving toward the judgment day. He set eternity in our hearts for a reason. The author of this book, very often in the book, is talking about things that happen under the sun. And that phrase, under the sun, is a view of life without consideration of God. When you hear that, that's a clue that what's going on there is somebody living with this default setting of life, and they're not considering God and things. And everything's always going wrong. They're always making wrong turns, and they end up frustrated, and they end up holding a bag full of nothing. And so that's under the sun kind of activity. And he's unlocking for us the appropriate timing of life for his readers. There's good in life. God's design. God's put good in it. And appropriateness fills the life of the one who's good in the sight of God. And they're thinking about heaven and eternal perspective of things. All right, we come to this phrase, an eternity. That idea of eternity, that is the timing mechanism. That's the timing mechanism to know what's appropriate at this time and when that's appropriate. That's a big clue to us. Verse 9 through 11. What profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? I've seen the task which God's given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. He's made everything appropriate in its time. He's also set eternity in their heart. Yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. That section has implications and applications of those first 8 verses. The first 8 verses are setting up this as sort of a conclusion. What profit is there? What benefit? What advantage is there to all the toil and labor of life? How do you move through life that way and find a profit in it? A real profit. Not something that's going to get taken away from you in the end and you end up with nothing. Vanity, vexation of spirit. Not that. Where's the real profit in all of that? And then he uses that word task. Did you notice that word task there in verse 10? I've seen the task which God has given to the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. That word task comes up about 8 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I began to notice, I started looking at those verses where that word task occurs. And so many times that's about not considering God in something. Let me give you just 2 or 3 examples. It comes up in chapter 1, verse 13. I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Chapter 2, verse 23. Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. Chapter 2, verse 26. For to a person who is good in his sight, he's given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he's given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to the one who's good in God's sight. But everything is appropriate, everything is beautiful, everything is fitting in its time. And that all has to do with the key. He set eternity in our hearts. And if you have that view of eternity in your heart, and you look at life that way, and that's how you move through life, everything is appropriate, everything is beautiful in its time. And you understand the timing because you're thinking with a mind that is set on things above. We'll never understand in the rest of that verse, we'll never understand the fullness of all that God has planned, all that God has done from beginning to end, but He has given us eternity in our hearts. So we can understand what we're supposed to do in the moments and events of life. The idea is there's more to life than this earthly existence. We look Godward in the activities of life. It gives sense, and it gives order, and it gives priority to life that's appropriate. Now, I want to go back to that article that I mentioned in the beginning of the lesson. I want to go back to that article because there's some more in it that's really interesting to me. The preacher who wrote that is talking in the article about a member of their congregation who was diagnosed with ALS. We often call that Lou Gehrig's disease. And it was going to take away his motor skills and eventually his life. And this member of the church, he did something really unique. He decided he was going to chronicle his disease. He was going to make a diary of it day by day, and he was going to do that from a spiritual viewpoint in order to help other people. And that's what he did. And one of the major events in his diary of his disease, he noted in that the last Sunday morning that he would ever attempt to assemble with the saints. And he wasn't successful. He couldn't do it anymore. He didn't make it that Sunday morning. And he knew he's getting worse, not better. And he knew he would never be able to do it again. It would never happen again. That was his last attempt to assemble with the saints on a Sunday morning. And he talked about how much he loved the assembly, how much he loved worshiping with God's people. He knew that it was coming, and so in the previous weeks, he made the most of every assembly that he possibly could. He really let the prayers sink in and the songs that were sung. He thought about the words. He thought about the meaning. He looked around him, noticed his brothers and sisters in Christ. He didn't engage in the usual small talk. You think we're going to have a hard winter this year? What do you think about those woolly worms? He didn't engage in the small talk. He would make comments that were weighty. He would talk about things that were important. He tried to speak to the hearts of his Christian family in ways that would matter. And maybe they would think about it later, and it would mean something to them. He'd look around, whether he was in the foyer or in the auditorium, and maybe he's on this side and he's looking over here, and he's not going to be able to get to them. But when he saw them, he'd just pause where he was, and in silence he'd offer a word of prayer for them. He made the most of every assembly that he possibly could. And when he couldn't attend the services anymore, he did what so many of us do. He turned on the live stream. He did what he could do. But he made note of this in his diary. He said it's sort of like looking at a photograph of a loved one rather than being with them. And here come the holidays, and you know what that feels like, right? You can look at a photograph, you can make a phone call, but there's something different when you're in the room with someone. There's just something different about that. And he said it was like looking at a photograph. It wasn't the same. And the preacher who wrote the article, he noted this toward the end of it: the importance of living every day as though it's our last day while we're still attending to all those things are the normal needs of life, default settings life. Got to have food to eat, got to have shelter over our heads at night, you got to do these things. But to live each day as if it's your last while you're taking care of all these normal things that need to be taken care of every day. Keep that eternity in your heart kind of mode going. Keep thinking about that. Let that govern everything else that we need to take care of in life so that default setting of life doesn't take us over. And that's sort of how he ended it. There is an appointed time for everything, and there's a time for every event under heaven. When we live in this world and we look toward eternity, we find the wisdom, the knowledge, and the joy that God desires to give to those who are good in His sight. We're going to close our lesson this evening with a final New Testament passage, and then we'll offer the invitation. It comes from Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 17. Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Perhaps this lesson has caused you to think about some things that maybe need ordering in your life, prioritizing, and having eternity in your heart and therefore in your life. If we can help you this evening, we offer the invitation and hope that you will come forward as we stand and sing together.